Ladies and gentlemen, welcome once again to the Tribble Timewarp. It is the 30th of June and a fairly major patch hit Tribble last night. A lot of changes, expanded patch notes are on the Cryptic website as you'd expect. Head down to the Tribble forum and you'll see them there under the release notes as per usual. Of interest, however, as you can see, 12 has got its first tier starbase under construction. Now, there's an interesting little bug that's popped up here. If I bring up the current ongoing projects, you will note that we didn't finish the contributions, but the project itself is still counting down. Now, this has hit 3 of our ongoing missions. You can see we've got the support local systems and ongoing research here. Curiously, these activated within about 30 seconds of each other, so I'm wondering if this is somehow tied to the fact that the Tribble server was presumably brought down, patched and re-upped. Something similar has hit our Starbase upgrade, 4 hours 50 minutes, and yet we somehow have 300 marks short, give or take, and 72,000 Bridge Officer skill points. Now this is a real shame because, of course, while I'd love 1.5 million fleet creds, the mission's in progress, so yeah, it doesn't work, which is a bit of a pain, but again, you'll notice the timer, 4 hours 49 left. I'm recording this at 8 PM British summertime, give or take, so that mission would have gone up, what, 16 hours ago? Which would have been 2000, about 4 in the morning. That would have triggered about 8 PM Friday night California time. So yeah, I'm thinking something has gone haywire between the mission activation sequence and the server going down and up for the patch. However, that could just be a fairly unique set of circumstances. The real highlight of this video, however, is that we currently have Fleet Retrofits. Now, if I pull the fleet window back up, yes, I'm doing this on the fly. Now then, holdings, military. You'll notice here that this has changed. We used to just have classified ship variant, Starfleet and KDF in previous patches. We've now actually got listings of each ship and what we get at each tier. So you'll notice that we get some quite interesting things, and the further up the tiers we go, naturally, the more advanced the stuff we get is. Interesting point here, Fleet Heavy Escort Carrier. Now, of course, the only way to get an escort carrier at the moment is through the, well, it's now the Z store, isn't it? It'll be interesting to see if I can get that and what the difference is, because if you're essentially just paying 2,000 C points for a photon launcher, people are naturally going to say, well, hang on, why don't I just buy the Thunderchild, spend, what is it? It's much less than the, here we are, Escort Child Thunder. Of course, I've got them bought out, so it's command level, that is 800 C points, get the phaser point defense console, which scales with level as all these things do, and forget the photon launcher and save myself, well, 1200 Zen. You do the maths, depends what Cryptic decides to set the exchange rate at, or rather what Perfect World decides to set the exchange rate at. Basically, I can get 90% of the functionality for rather less than half the cost. We shall see. The variants themselves are interesting. Essentially, they're tier 5+1, so you get the extra console slot and you get boosts to the hull and often the shield strength multiplier as well. We'll come over each class in detail over the course of this video. One other ship that has made a comeback, and I'm not entirely sure why, is the Miranda. The Ensign Eliminator, ladies and gentlemen. How many times did you wish during your lieutenant grades that you could get something else? Well, if you didn't, and if you were somehow sorry to see this undergunned, underpowered, obsolete, yet, let's face it, attractive enough in its own little way starship back after dumping it at Lieutenant? Well, now you can for the low, low price of 8,000 dilithium. Aside from role-playing, I'm not sure why you would, but hey, it's not really costing anyone else anything. So, on to the retrofits. As you can see from here, you actually get two different kinds of retrofit. There is the standard version, which is more or less just a, hey guys, you can have your Stargazer skin or your hospital ship skin at level 50 now. Not necessarily a bad thing. That is pretty much a standard heavy cruiser build. And you pay 200,000 fleet credits per. For those of you who haven't been on the fleet system yet, fleet credits are what you get for turning over fleet marks, bridge officer skill points, various DOFs, satellite turrets, you name it. Anything that goes into the fleet missions gets you fleet credits. Varying rates of exchange, it's typically about 100 to 250 per item. It's pretty good. If you're worried about the fact that certain people are going to get ahead because they happened to be online when a mission that, say, needed 72,000 bridge officer points happened to pop and they grabbed it all and got 1.5 million fleet cred straight up, bear in mind that once things stabilise, and they will, because even the largest fleet is going to run through its stockpiles, then things become much more open, and people will burn through their stockpiles very quickly, certainly before we have some of these eventual options. I mean, you'll note that some of the really neat stuff, like the Intrepid retrofit, needs a tier 5 starbase, needs a tier 5 shipyard, tier 5, tier 4 for the Galaxy retrofit. Anyhow, fleet standard retrofits, standard console, your old classic skins back. The fleet retrofits, however, boom, you can see that you get an extra console slot, and your hull and your shield modifiers generally get upped by about 10%. So, yeah, much more effective ship just on the bigger numbers. You'll also notice that you require only 20,000 fleet credits to get them, but you also need something called a commissioning directive. Now, at the moment, I have no idea how to get one of these. I suspect, given that it is making up 180,000 fleet credits, plus the change on top for the fact that this is a more effective ship, I suspect that it is going to prove a little bit awkward to get. It is going to be, well, I'll get this one on a whim, I'll get maybe research science vessel on a whim, and just because I can, and to muck around with the skin and the bridge officer layout. But if you're serious, you buy the fleet retrofit. Anyway, from the top, fleet escorts have been renamed somewhat. They are now fleet patrol escorts at the upper tier. They are called blockade escorts for some reason at the standard level. I have no idea why. It looks as though somebody was mucking around with the names and decided, hey, you know what, let's go with it. It still has the classic fleet escort look. They haven't altered the skins one bit, which, if you thought like me that the fleet escorts looked a little on the weird and mashed together from spare bits we had lying around the shipyard, then hey, it still looks like they mashed it together from bits they had lying around the shipyard. Configuration, pretty standard escort stuff. So Commander Tactical, Lieutenant Commander Tactical, Lieutenant Engineering, Ensign Universal. Now, universal slots on Starfleet vessels are, of course, rare as hen's teeth. I mean, you've got the Nebula and the various takes on the Odyssey have them, but this is the first time I think we've seen it on a Starfleet escort, and that's actually quite a handy station, because obviously you can flick it between engineering team, science team, hazard emitters 1, tractor 1, polarized hull, blow it any which way you like. So that gives you a little bit more flexibility, a little more customization to your ship. Deep Space Science Vessel is pretty standard stuff. That is... yeah, that's pretty much the stock science vessel setup. Ensign in engineering rather than ensign in science, which is what you get with the long-range vessels, but hey, nothing major there. Heavy cruisers, standard as we've said. Heavy cruiser retrofit, again, what you'd expect. Research retrofit, same bridge officer setup, just smaller numbers. Very noticeably smaller numbers in the case of the hull strength. The Fleet Star Cruiser, the whale ship, is back and it is viable once again. That's actually a really evil tanking setup, if you ask me. 42,009 base hits and a 1.1 shield modifier. By the time you've tacked armour and a shield capacity generator console onto that, and all of the other fun tanking stuff, that ship's going to be a beast to kill. And it's, yeah, tier 2, so that's going to be fairly easy to obtain, obviously contingent on what you have to do to get a commissioning directive. Recon Science Vessels, this is a game changer, ladies and gentlemen, even if it doesn't look like it. We have a third tactical station on a science vessel, and I can't think of an occasion, aside from obviously the Nebula and the Odyssey Science Cruiser, which are special cases because they're sea store, I can't think of a science vessel that's had this option before. So no longer do I have to choose between tactical team, fire at will, torpedo spread rather, pick any two of the three. I can now have my cake, and indeed my tactical officers, and eat them. And that sentence just came out horribly, horribly wrong, didn't it? 1.43 shield modifier, if that's cumulative and not multiplicative, then that's potentially 160% shield strength. Again, that ship could be interesting to take down. The Sabre is back, the little ship that could. Stock escort layout. Indeed, I think that's actually an identical bridge officer layout to what we had with the patrol escort. Let's just swing back and check. Lieutenant Commander, Commander, Lieutenant Ensign, Lieutenant, 442. Hold your breath. No, it isn't, because obviously you've got the ensign slot, so you're trading a little flexibility for a little bridge officer station, and yeah, less durable, but possibly more of a punch to it. Matter of opinion as to which you would take. Then obviously we have the smaller version which drops the engineering console but keeps the bridge officer config and is much, much cheaper. Defiant Retrofit has the option to fit the cloaking device. Now, I'm wondering if you can fit quad phaser cannon. I suspect you can, because I can't remember anything on the Sao Paulo that said these cannons are restricted to the Sao Paulo variant. So, yeah. Full on Defiant. Again, they've upped the hull and the shield modifiers. 0.9 in this case for an escort. That's really nice. I've never understood that Ensign tactical station, honestly. I mean, by the time you've put in 2 TAC teams, well, I suppose you could go for top spread 1 or high yield 1, but maybe. I've never spent much time as a tactical captain. Anyhow, let's rock on. The Nebula gets its reskin, so those of you who didn't pick it up on the C store, now you have the option. Bridge officer config is the same as the C store Nebula. Hull is upped again slightly. Again, we have this shield modifier of 1.43, and we've kept the Lieutenant Universal slot, so potentially you can build quite a nasty little engineering support and healing vessel outfit. Your trade-off, of course, is that you don't have the Lieutenant Commander Science Station anymore, and there's no way you can get one, so it's not quite as purely effective as the Intrepid retrofits in the science role. On the other hand, you get more engineering slots, and you get more effective engineering slots because you don't get the Lieutenant Commander Station on the Intrepid. So, It's always been a trade-off, and that's always been the nice thing about the C-Store. They've always stayed relatively consistent in terms of power level. It's never been a best-in-class option. Usually. Never been a best-in-class option. The Nova. Again, this is another really interesting ship if you're a science captain, because it trades the Lieutenant Commander Science for Lieutenant Commander Tactical. Remember what I said about the... I have a memory like a sieve at times. Remember what I said about the Fleet Reconnaissance retrofit being a game changer? This is the same, only more so. Because, of course, you have the Lieutenant Commander slot, so potentially you can load Torpedo Spread 3 or Attack Pattern Omega 1 into that and get a fairly effective tactical setup on your ship. The trade-off, of course, is that you've only got the 1.11 shield modifier. Hull strength is only 27.4, even with the Fleet Retrofit, so the ship's comparatively fragile, which is what you'd expect. It's the Nova, it's the dinky little ship of the science fleet. Standard retrofit, they seriously mucked around with the bridge stations for this, so rather than Lieutenant Commander Tactical, you have Ensign Tactical instead. You still have the same flexibility, it's just not quite as powerful, and of course shield modifiers and hull strength are right down. Moving on, the Galaxy retrofit. Again, this can match the Source of Separation console, so if you've got the Exploration retrofit from the C-Store, you don't lose that capacity. Pretty standard engineering build, if you ask me. 44,000 hit points. Again, this is going to be a beast of a tank, but if we pop back to the Fleet Star Cruiser, bump, yeah, 1100 hull difference isn't necessarily the kind of upgrade you'd be looking for from a tier 4 as opposed to a tier 2. On the other hand, as I said, it's always going to be an interesting problem for Cryptic, because they have got to balance off how much more powerful you make a tier 4. It's got to be enough to justify as an upgrade. On the other hand, you don't want it to be so game-breaking, particularly in PvP, or what's left of it, that it becomes a no-brainer decision. Of course, you'll go for it, and particularly such a no-brainer decision that everyone who's still on the tier 2 gives up and goes home. It needs to stay relatively competitive. The Sovi, ladies and gentlemen. Apparently someone decided that the Sovereign's mission statement should be to seek out new life, new civilizations, and kick their arses. So we have Lieutenant Commander Tactical on a cruiser. The only other Federation ship I can think which manages that would be the Excelsior at the moment, and that was a big thing when they released it in the C-Store. We have a Lieutenant Universal Station, and yeah, pretty much Star Cruiser stats, so 43k hull. You could build an absolute beast of an engineering stroke tactical cruiser with this. That's a very, very aggressive setup. The only down, of course, is that if you want science powers, you're going to have to blow the Universal Station there. So I'm not entirely sure that it's quite got the flexibility that that Universal Station normally signifies. The Intrepid, that is the standard Intrepid bridge officer layout. Again, they've got the enhanced shields, 1.43, and the hull is not quite as tough as Nebula, but then this thing turns almost like an escort. It's been the Intrepid's defining shtick against the Nebula and the other science vessels that it's comparatively fragile, but hey, if you want something that thinks it's an escort, then this is the ship to go for. Finally, we've got the Odyssey. Again, this is tier 5. This is, as far as I can tell, this is the Christmas Odyssey that's made a bit of a comeback. So, Lieutenant Commander Universal. Lieutenant Commander Universal, Lieutenant Tactical, Commander Engineering, Lieutenant Science, Engine Science. Now this is interesting because let's pop back to the assault cruiser for a second. Lieutenant Commander Tactical. Yeah, I mean, essentially you're trading an ensign engineering slot for an ensign science slot between these two. But because of the way the Universal Station is set, because that's a Lieutenant Commander Universal on the Oddie and only a Lieutenant on the Sovereign, I'm looking at the Oddie and I'm starting to wonder why anybody would buy the Sovereign. Okay, there is a minor difference. 900 hit points. That is, what, 2% hull difference baseline? Oddie shields are slightly better, 0.05 multiplier difference. Oddie has a much larger crew, and there's a 1 degree per second turn rate difference. But the fact remains that the Oddie can stick a tactical officer into that slot and have the arse-kicking abilities of the Sovereign, or it can load in the science and go pure science build, or it can load engineering and go tanking monster. I don't know. I'm starting to think that the Oddie needs... No, the Oddie doesn't need a nerf, but the Sovereign does need a bit of a boost, particularly in its flexibility, because at the moment, yes, it's a very heavy, tactically oriented, damage oriented cruiser build, but I can make an Oddie almost as good by sticking a tactical officer in there. Okay, I trade off some consoles, but with the universal consoles flying around, you can work around that to a certain extent, unless you were planning to really load up plus damage consoles into here and just burn off excess science slots by using a universal console in that station instead. Then the Oddie is going to edge it over the Sovereign for most people. So I don't know if that needs a rethink. Ladies and gentlemen, that has been the Fleet Escort Retrofits, and I'll see you next time.